Shante.
Thank you, John, for that introduction to the Peel and to the Baltimore National Heritage Area. We are so grateful to have Dr. Cheryl LaRoche give this presentation. I will say that the stories that are just endless in Baltimore are always available through the Peel, because Peel is a storytelling community museum. And that's one of the things that the Baltimore National Heritage Area is responsible for, is elevating and telling the stories of those unknown individuals who have made major changes in our society and nationally. So without further ado, I would like to forward on with the presentation. One of the things I'd like to remind everybody that's here today is that we will also have a lecture on April 24th for elevating Baltimore's Asian community. This is our last lecture series, and we are so happy to have them come and tell us about the Asian community of all diaspora that came into Baltimore to make Baltimore the city that it is. So thank you so much. And please, if you have any questions or need to follow up on this program, you can go to explorebaltimore.org and find us there. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Um, Hello, everyone. I'm Cheryl LaRoche, and I'm your speaker for today. Hopefully, you can all see that. So, the poet and creative writer and lecturer, essayist, artist, activist, and novelist, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was a radical political thinker, abolitionist, Underground Railroad operative, and feminist. All these things describe who she was. Frances Ellen Watkins was born free from slavery 200 years ago in Baltimore. Her mother had been enslaved, but her grandmother managed to buy her mother's freedom, which allowed Frances to be born free, because the condition of the child, of course, follows the condition of the mother. Frances was orphaned by the age of 3, and she says that she yearned for a mother's love ever after. Frances was her mother's only child. She had no brother or sister to share her childhood. As a young writer, Frances used her pen to express the loneliness that stalked her childhood days. This is how Frances came to live with her aunt, Henrietta Russell Watkins, and her uncle in Baltimore. Education was inside the family tradition. Her maternal uncle, Reverend William J. Watkins Sr., a lay Methodist Episcopal minister, had been educated at Bethel Charity School, which Daniel Coker founded in 1807. When Coker, one of the original founders of the AME Church, when he emigrated from Baltimore to Liberia to help the American Colonization Society establish that new nation, Watkins' 19-year-old son, also named William Watkins, took over the school as the teacher. Watkins merged the school with the Sharp Street School to form Watkins Academy for Negro Youth in 1820 to train the Black children of Baltimore in history, geography, mathematics, English, natural philosophy, Greek, Latin, music, and rhetoric. And of course, there was a daily study of the Bible. Frances was educated at the school until she was about 13. She had been raised in the lap of Black political activism. William Watkins' life was crowded with Black abolitionists, but at 13, she was out on her own. After that, she was put to work by a book merchant to earn her own living. She was taught sewing, took care of children, and used her spare time to satisfy what she called a greed for books. As a 14-year-old, she began to reveal an ardent thirst for knowledge and remarkable talent for composition. She had an amazing command of the English language. At 14, she also began publishing poems of protest in anti-slavery journals. By the time she was 20, she had written a number of prose and poetry pieces. A publisher found them important enough to compile them into a small volume titled Forest Leaves. For a while, they thought it was completely lost to us, but there is this copy. At this early age, some of her pieces attracted attention and found their way into newspapers. But for Harper, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was the abomination of the 19th century. And she called the federal government the arch traitor to liberty. That year, Harper left Baltimore at the age of 25, headed for the free state of Ohio, and found a teaching position in domestic science or sewing, what we call home economics now, at Union Seminary. The AME School for Black students near Columbus was the forerunner to Wilberforce University. She began her career as an assistant instructor with John M. Brown as the principal. Now, not to be confused with the martyred John Brown. John M. Brown was to go on to become the 11th bishop of the AME Church in 1868, a position that he held for 25 years. But not finding Ohio to her liking, Harper moved on to a teaching position in Little York, Pennsylvania. Her confrontation with unruly children and her sole responsibility for a class of 53 students likely helped drive her out of Little York. But she never forgot the oppression of her people back in Maryland. And Frances had seen slave coffles headed for the Deep South and witnessed the dejection of parents, children, and elderly people chained together in Baltimore. Some were marched and chained through the city streets in the middle of the night. And she knew that the slave pens that stood on Pratt Street. She recognized the buyers and the sellers of human flesh, Woolfolk, Donovan, Campbell, and Slater, the purveyors of absolute misery. She knew about suicide among the enslaved. She had to walk past auction houses and jails where whippings took place. Of Baltimore, she said that it wasn't that they didn't have a right to breathe air as freely as anybody else here in Baltimore, but, she said, we are treated worse than aliens among a people whose language we speak, whose religion we profess, and whose blood flows and mingles in our veins. Maryland's attack on free Blacks forced her uncle, William Watkins, to close his academy and move his family to Toronto, Canada in 1852, so he could spend some years before his death on, quote, free land. In 1832 and again in 1853, the Maryland General Assembly enacted laws forbidding free people of color from coming into the state on threat of being imprisoned and sold into slavery. Now, this law really, just a second. This law pushed Frances to enter the anti-slavery movement, where initially she was not encouraged. Spurred on by the death of a man who had unwittingly violated the law and was subsequently sold into slavery in Georgia, and then escaped, but died in the process. And she pledged to use her time and talent and energy in the cause of freedom ever since, after that occurrence. By 1851, Frances had moved to Philadelphia and lived with the family of the famed Underground Railroad activist known as the president of the Underground Railroad, William Still. She arrived with a satchel full of poems that she hoped to publish. She was at the forefront of a new generation of women. For 2 generations, Black Baltimoreans, including the Watkins family, had kept up religious and activist connections with Philadelphia's African American and Quaker communities. In Philadelphia, she looked for opportunities to publish and to be useful. Among other things, she used her Philadelphia home as a station of the Underground Railroad and listened to the harrowing stories, as William Still had done for his book on the Underground Railroad. And she really made her speaking debut in August of 1853 by reading some of her poetry. This is the spine of his book, The Underground Railroad. She shared the platform with Mary Ann Shadd, the first Black woman to publish a newspaper in North America. Shadd had just launched Canada's first anti-slavery newspaper, the Provincial Freeman, 5 months earlier. So these women are activists, and they're activists in the world of publishing, in the world of changing ideas and thoughts. And so in poetry, in novels, in articles in newspapers, women are out there pushing for not just equal rights, but the end of slavery, and their vehicle is the written word. These 2 women shared the podium with Robert Purvis, who is a well-seasoned African-American activist and president of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society. The society, however, declined to accept Harper's offer to lecture, so she merely read a few of her poems. But what stands out for me is her December 1853 publication of her poem, Eliza Harris. William Lloyd Garrison published the poem in The Liberator, the most prominent anti-slavery newspaper at the time. And Frederick Douglass published it a week later in Frederick Douglass's paper. Watkins had taken her inspiration for the poem from Harriet Beecher Stowe's fictionalized depiction of Eliza's escape in Uncle Tom's Cabin. So, we have the woman who would become America's most important African-American poet in direct dialogue with the woman who would become one of the world's most famous and best-selling authors of all time. The Eliza Harris poem and dedication to Mrs. Harriet Beecher Stowe appeared in Poems and Miscellaneous Subjects, published in 1854. And this is where Watkins thanked Stowe for her, quote, pen of fire. By August of that year, Watkins had given her first anti-slavery lecture, Education and Elevation of the Colored Race, in New Bedford, Massachusetts, which is where Frederick Douglass escaped to after he came out of Maryland, widely described as the hotbed of the fugitive. She was at that time 29 years old. So like Sojourner Truth, Harper was one of the first African-American women to be hired as an abolitionist lecturer. For the following 2 years, she confined her speaking mainly to the New England states. From 1856 to 1860, she spoke throughout the East and Midwest. In 1856, she entered the international sphere, making her first visit to Canada, lecturing in Niagara Falls and Toronto. She was also concerned for the plight of those who had escaped to Canada. On that trip, she recalled, quote, "Well, I have gazed for the first time upon free land, and, would you believe it, tears sprang to my eyes, and I wept. Oh, it was a glorious sight to gaze for the first time on the land where a poor slave flying from our glorious land of liberty would in a moment find his fetters broken, his shackles loose, and whatever he was in the land of Washington, here he becomes a man and a brother." She had become a paid anti-slavery agent. Sojourner Truth was the only African-American woman to spend her life on the anti-slavery circuit. Perhaps Harper may have met her and been influenced by Sojourner Truth, who was in Ohio and spoke throughout the state in the spring of 1851 to the winter of 1853. Their paths may have crossed many times in later years as well. Although Harper was shy and modest, she soon learned to confront slavery head on with unmatched boldness. She was able to defy the attitudes against women speaking in public and commanded large audiences with her anti-slavery lectures and poetry. Her lyrical works attacked slavery and taught people how to live lives of high moral purpose and dedicated social service. Her fame as a writer and lecturer grew internationally, and she was one of the 19th century's most prolific African American novelists and its best loved African American poet. As the first Black woman lecturer for the American Anti-Slavery Society, Harper often incorporated poetry into her anti-slavery lectures. Her lectures and poetry predominantly spoke to Black women's experiences during slavery and later during the Reconstruction era. Harper was a poised speaker before an audience, a woman of intelligence, in command of persuasive language as well as hard facts in her presentations. As she was confronted by the Black codes of the Midwestern states, which had multiple heinous provisions, Harper observed, quote, "Indiana shuts her doors upon us. Illinois denies us admission to her prairie homes. Oregon refuses us an abiding place for the soles of our weary feet. And even Minnesota has our exclusion under consideration," end quote. Frederick Douglass said of the Black laws of Illinois, "It would seem that the men who enacted that law had not only banished from their minds all sense of justice, but all sense of shame." In an act of solidarity that demonstrated her radical consciousness, Harper wrote a letter to John Brown, the martyr, when she was in Indiana in 1859, while he was in prison, a week before his execution for the raid on Harper's Ferry. She wrote to him, quote, "You rock the bloody Bastille, and I hope that from your sad fate, great good may arise in the cause of freedom. Already from prison has come the shout of triumph against the great sin of our country," end quote. A year later, she married Fenton Harper from Loudoun County, Virginia. The marriage took place in Cincinnati and Hamilton County, Ohio. AME Bishop Paul Quinn, whom I write about extensively, was active in the area and may well have known Harper. She had a strong connection to the AME Church. She used her earnings from her lectures and books and sales to purchase a small farm near Columbus, Ohio, and began keeping house. Writing was becoming an acceptable occupation for women that could be done from home without taking away from the domestic duties or from their children. Harper largely gave up the lecture circuit between 1860 and 1864 and was at home writing and selling butter during most of the Civil War years. Her one daughter, Mary, was born in 1862. Harper's husband, Fenton, died after 4 years of marriage in May of 1864, leaving her a widow in debt with 4 children, 3 of his and her daughter, Mary. Harper tried to keep the children together, but in no time, she says, creditors had broken up his house, sold his bed, and taken away his means of support. I've seen this before. This is not the first time I've read about this happening to these women as soon as their husband died. Harper immediately sought employment and returned to lecturing and to her continued activism. Toward the end of the Civil War in May of 1864, the same month her husband died, Harper lectured twice on the mission of the war at the Bethel AME Church, shown here in Indianapolis, Indiana. It is possible that she met Bishop Quinn yet again at that time. He was the presiding bishop and founder of the Bethel Church and several other AME churches in Indiana. Unfortunately, by the summer, arsonists had burned the church to the ground. Some said it was because of their radical stand. This is not the original church, and it's not on the original ground, but this is what's standing in Indianapolis now, although it's now been turned into a hotel. So immediately following the war, this fearless woman set out with her daughter to lecture not only across the Northeast, but in the Ku Klux Klan-ridden South during Reconstruction, laboring on behalf of the newly freed brethren. After emancipation, she visited and worked in every southern state in the Union, with the exception of Arkansas and Texas. She was in the colleges, she was in the schools, she was in the churches, she even came into the humble homes. Her themes ranged from education to temperance and to good home building, industry, and morality. She said, I meet with a people eager to hear, she said, ready to listen, as if they felt that the slumber of the ages had been broken and that they were to sleep no more. It was not unusual for her to speak at 2, 3, even 4 meetings in a single day. The 11th National Women's Rights Convention. It was held in New York City on May 16, 1866, during a national debate about whether to grant the rights and privileges of full citizenship to newly freed African Americans during Reconstruction. The convention also took place during a major effort to secure the right to vote for women. In her speech, "We're all bound up together," Harper, an educated, queenly woman, told the audience that she had recently been mistreated on a railroad car coming from Washington to Baltimore after being forced to sit in the smoking car. Now, if you've read any literature about the 19th century, you know the smoking car is a vile place. Not only is it filled with smoke, but people are chewing tobacco, there's spittoons, there's all that. It's not a good place, and it's dirty. And she had probably, as I read before, paid for a first-class ticket, and it's still, the Blacks were forced to move into the smoking car. But what Frances Harper said was, you know what, they did it once, but the next time they tried it, they failed, for I would not go in. She said, I felt the fight in me. And this is the part that really touched me. She said, but I don't want to have to fight all the time, end quote. With the end of slavery, she focused much of her attention towards Black women in the South and felt strongly that Black women were a key element to racial uplift. She began addressing these women more often and more directly, while at the same time collaborating with white women's groups in temperance and women's clubs movement. Black women were not given the same courtesies and respect white women expected and were given in public, Harper said, and some in private spaces, posing a special, particular burden for Black women. She said, quote, you white women speak of rights. She said, I speak of wrongs, end quote. Would white women with the vote, Harper asked, help protect the civil rights of Black women? After Harper's speech, the first Equal Rights Amendment was presented to the conference. After the Civil War, Harper traveled south to teach newly freed African Americans and to work with the Freedmen's Bureau, which was created by the United States government to assist African Americans transition from enslavement to freedom, and to encourage African Americans to exercise their vote and to work their own land. In her lectures, she spoke to racially mixed audiences, and she also gained, again, international recognition for her literature and poetry. It kept growing. Across her career, she published 10 books of poetry and writing for the Anglo-African. She became the first Black woman to publish a short story. Her love of books never left her, and her love of writing continued throughout her life. She celebrated the ratification of the 15th Amendment, granting the vote to Black men with her poem, 15th Amendment. She was known to speak smoothly and continuously for nearly 2 hours. She is remembered as a tireless organizer and coalition builder. She was a founder of the American Women's Suffrage Association, which lobbied for state governments to enact laws either granting or expanding women's rights in the United States. She found her activism across multiple platforms, whether it was education, whether it was moving against slavery, whether it was the Underground Railroad or whether it was in the women's rights movement and the push towards citizenship and suffrage. Harper moved to Philadelphia permanently in 1871. Later in her life, she served as a voice for Black women, as a national board member of the National Women's Christian Temperance Union, and as an executive officer of the Universal Peace Union. However, within the women's rights movement, she ultimately found that these organizations prioritized white women's concerns more than Black needs. This is another view of the house. It still stands, and the historical marker that's there. This is a quilt, which I just love. It's a beautiful, beautiful production. She was a striking advocate for such causes as the abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, and for the temperance movement. We don't ever stress this enough, but the temperance movement, people were, potable water was a problem. People are often drunk. They're drinking heavily. And the temperance movement sort of brought that under control because drunkenness was a huge problem at the time. In observing Harper, a friend called her, quote, this bronze muse, a strong face with a shadowed glow upon it, indicative of thoughtful fervor. Her manner is marked by dignity and composure. As I listened to her, there swept over me in a chill wave of horror the realization that this noble woman, had she not been rescued from her mother's condition, meaning slavery, might have been sold on the auction block to the highest bidder. Her intellect, fancy eloquence, the flashing wit, and her pure Christian character, all thrown in with the recollection that women like her could be dragged out of public conveyances in our city or frowned out of fashionable churches by Anglo-Saxon saints. I'm sure this was just a horrible realization that under different circumstances, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper may well have ended up being enslaved in the South. The 1890s was a period of intense intellectual and political activity. Harper sold more than 50,000 copies or more of 4 works before she published her best-known work. Just a second here. Before she published her best-known work, the seminal text, Iola Leroy, which she published at the age of 67 in 1892. Her friend William Still wrote the introduction to the book, where he reminds the reader that Harper took the greatest interest in meetings called exclusively for women, where she could grapple with the sexual exploitation of enslaved women in a way that she could not do in front of a mixed audience. In Iola Leroy, Harper exposes the racial and sexual violence that endangered and confronted Black women before and after the Civil War. Her work contributed to conversation about Black women's education, miscegenation, and social responsibility. She used her writings to speak out against racism, sexism, and classism. With her organizing, Harper was at the forefront of the Black women's club movement. In fact, Harper was a founding member of the National Association for Colored Women and served as the vice president for the first term. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was a Black woman at the center of the 19th century democratic challenges while cultivating unique perspectives through her work. Her biographer, Melba Joyce Boyd, continues. Her insights gives us the valuable framework for contemporary radical thought. And if there's one thing that struck me again in revisiting Frances Harper, is how resonant her words are for today. I keep wondering what she would think if she were here in the flesh to observe our 21st century country. She was ever suspicious of government and persistent in her critique of individual or social domination over the human spirit for the purpose of material, political, or personal gain. Her work laid early foundations for later civil rights movements, and her thoughts and work have a refreshing, soul-stirring ring. She is every bit as eloquent as Frederick Douglass, although she is far less quoted. Her biographer calls her the most popular African-American writer of the 19th century and one of the most important women in United States history. She was the most beloved poet prior to Paul Laurence Dunbar. Throughout much of her work, Harper highlights the conflicts between American values and what Americans actually are able to do. I want to give you a few lines from her poem, Double Standard. Crime has no sex, and yet today I wear the brand of shame, whilst he, amid the gay and proud, still bears an honored name. You can blame me if I've learned to think your hate a vice, a sham, when you so coldly crushed me down and then excused the man. She was prophetic. Foreshadowing modern political realities, Harper said in 1867, if we look through history, we will find that there has been an old struggle going on for ages, a struggle of the oppressed against the oppressor, a battle fought under different names, but is still the continuation of the old struggle. In one age, it has been a struggle between freedom on one side and slavery on the other. Now, slavery as an institution has been overthrown, but slavery as an idea still lives in the American republic. And the problem and the duty of the present hour is this: whether there is strength enough, wisdom enough, and virtue enough in our American nation to lift it out of trouble, whether it's by legislation and jurisprudence, these distinctions between man and man on account of his race or color or descent shall cease. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper died in Philadelphia in 1911. She is buried in Eden Cemetery in Collingdale, Pennsylvania, which is part of the Pennsylvania Hallowed Grounds. Her daughter Mary never married and remained with Harper throughout her life, but died 3 years before her mother. They are buried together. Harper's tombstone is engraved with the words from one of her most famous poems, "Bury me in the land, bury me in a free land." Quote, I ask no monument proud and high to arrest the gaze of the passers-by. All that my yearning spirit craves is bury me not in the land of slaves. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper has been called the daughter of Maryland and the grand old woman of Maryland, counterbalancing that grand old man of Maryland, Frederick Douglass. I will end with a quote from her dear friend, George Bragg. In the ages yet to come, the redeemed and uplifted womanhood of the race will lovingly revert to the precious memories of the past and raise up and call her blessed of the Lord. There is the Harper House at Morgan State University, which was named in her honor in 1951. And Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was inducted into the Maryland Women's Hall of Fame in 1987. This remarkable woman, clearly ahead of her time, clearly thinking and anticipating some of the things that we're confronting today, left a powerful legacy. And yet, as I speak about her, as I talk to other people, no one seems to know who she is unless they studied African American literature. She has been somehow left behind. And part of our mission, part of our work, is to bring this powerful, courageous, forward thinking woman back and bring her popularity, her history, and her life, and just reinvigorate it. And I'll say this last thing. Baltimore has a fantastic and incredible Black history. And yet somehow it never seems to really get further into the public understanding and awareness of just how powerful this city was. People don't understand that the largest free Black community in the country was in Baltimore. People don't understand all of the connections that that city had early on, and that it rivaled New York and Philadelphia in terms of its activism, even though, and this is the part that I think is still so confusing for people, and why I think Baltimore and Maryland, to some extent, need to do a better job. This is a slave state. And we have this level of activism producing some of the most important people in American history coming out of a state that condoned slavery till beyond the Emancipation Proclamation. So I want to thank you. And if you have any questions, I'll be ready to listen and entertain anything that you might have to ask or say, or any comments that you may have. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. LaRoche. If you want to post questions, at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button that you can post your questions in. In the meantime, I'll get things warmed up. Thank you again, Dr. LaRoche, for very compelling and wonderful history. I ask usually of all of our presenters, what was the most challenging part about doing research on this topic? And then we'll ask Shantae, why do you think this story is still relevant as we get other questions?
Um, the early history, Harper's early history in Baltimore has never really been fleshed out. And so anything you read is pretty much, I'm just regurgitating what other people have said. I have not looked through the documents and have gone through to see, but we don't know much or anything about her mother. We don't understand how her grandmother was able to purchase her freedom. The two William Watkins are so confusing. And if you read in most texts, people often confuse the father and the son. And there was a third William Watkins who was her uncle. So there are three, actually. So that part is extremely difficult. She has been written about as a poet. And so there's a lot of literary analysis. I do not think that her political activism and the strength and power, when you read during the time period, there's this discussion about how popular she is. You see her drawing these huge crowds. You see her speaking in all these places. But when you start to look through the analysis, let's say of the political analysis, she's often not there. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think the kind of having now delved into the lives of several people that were historical figures that were not known. It takes an effort that's unimaginable sometimes to get at the kinds of answers that I'm talking about. And, in terms of, this is why I keep pushing Baltimore. She's a child of Baltimore. Somehow the city has to come together, the archives, all the repositories have to come together, because this is where we're going to find her story. But I will say that I also know that a lot of the chattel records have been burned in Baltimore. I do know that a lot of the records around slavery have not been curated with the same diligence. And so I don't know what remains. So that's the answer to that question. You asked me, well, I think you said Shantae, you had a second question for her.
Yeah, why she finds the story still relevant and compelling today. I mean, it's for obvious for those of us who love history, but I'd like to get Shantae's take on, she continues to present these great stories.
So, I will tell you this, that I did not know. I'm a West Coast child, and I did not know about Frances Ellen Watkins until 20 years ago. And I was just doing some research to find out about different people that had lived in Baltimore to give tours and be an interpreter. And I read her poem, um, "Bury Me in a Free Land."
Mhm.
It resonated with me so much that I started to investigate more about her and found out that I think she stands on the same platform as Frederick Douglass
Yes,
and Harriet Tubman,
yes,
and the fact that she is from Baltimore. And nobody is aware of her. Now, I mean, of course, Dr. LaRoche mentioned that she has a location at Morgan. But like you say, unless you're a history major or you're into the academia of literature, you don't know who she is. And I think that her name should be raised with Frederick Douglass as a Baltimore uh, historical figure. And also, she should be important to women
yes,
because of her activism in women's rights and the suffrage movement. And
yes,
all of us that have been, especially since we're in Women's History Month, as all of us have found out through various, talks and everything, the white suffrage women they were not accepting of the black woman's vote. They did not want us to vote. And the women that stood in front of her said that they basically, I'm probably paraphrasing, they would die before they would have a black woman vote before uh, to vote in front of them. They weren't too happy about black men voting, but now you're bringing in another class of the of the black American. So Frances Ellen Watkins deserves to be recognized. Her story needs to be told. It needs to go outside of Baltimore, and it should be recognized in the state of Maryland. The unfortunate part is that she is buried in Philadelphia, which is, that was her home. That's where she lived. But that removes her from the Baltimore, um, you know, um, uh, area geographically. But
can I?
it does not remove her historically and her record. So
But
that's why I am really motivated to talk about her at every level I can.
but I also want to point out that she's buried in Philadelphia because she had to leave Baltimore. This was
Mm-hmm.
it's a slave state until after the Emancipation Proclamation.
Right.
So it's, we can bring her home, so to speak, and a home that would not take her the first time.
Yes.
So I understand what you're saying, but she couldn't, she didn't want to be buried here. So,
Well, I will tell you this, and I tell people this all right, because, for those that are online and are watching this, so the Baltimore National Heritage Area is one of 62 heritage areas across the country. So I'm not doing self promotion here, but what I am going to say, you will understand. Whether it's Philadelphia, whether it's New York, whether it's whatever state you live in, Baltimore is centric, and we are all connected. We are all connected. It's like roots. The roots go out, and sometimes the roots and the history starts in Baltimore. So it's not about her being buried in Philadelphia. It's about knowing her story and how she is connected to this national heritage area and what she should mean to the state of Maryland and the whole thing. And also the sadness that I will say that where we are in the 21st century in our I guess in our political and a situation that we're in right now. All of this is relevant, and we need to pay attention.
I've
History
got lots
is
of
important.
questions lined up. I don't want to interrupt. Thank you,
Oh no,
Shantae.
go ahead.
I'm
I want
gonna
you to take the
I
questions.
want
We
to,
only
yeah,
have
because
so
we
much
got a
time.
few minutes left. I just want to share. You got a lovely, informative presentation from Danita Terry, thank you very much for allowing us to learn this important American history. A comment from Robert Reyes, who says it's a comment, but it's actually a question. Watkins' house was located on Camden Street. Camden Station was built on that location after William Watkins moved to Toronto in 1854. Would Francis lived at the Camden Station site location? There's a question mark. I believe that's a question.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a question because again, that granular kind of understanding and movement of Francis's life in Baltimore, the reason why that I'm not, and I am a mapping person. I'm a person who details where you are in the landscape, but those kinds of questions have not been answered. We just
Yeah.
haven't been able to track her down,
Find
and
the archives.
yeah.
Yeah. Did Mrs. Harper earn her living more from public speaking or from her poetry reading publications from
I
school?
think her public speaking is supporting her, but she's also a best-selling author. I've never seen any figures that tell me one or the other, but I think she sustained herself through a combination. Now, if she's selling 50,000 copies of her writings and is able to buy a farm in Ohio, we know then on her own that she's earning good money from her publications. And then her speaking is also there. And I think the combination of her earnings is what gives her the financial wherewithal to own property.
Again, you got another fantastic presentation. Thanks so much. How do you think Maryland's position as a border state may have affected Harper and Black activism in Baltimore in general, if at all?
you know, Baltimore and Maryland are very confusing to study because it's a border state. And
Hmm.
so, on the one hand, slavery is thoroughly enforced, and on the other hand, we've got this huge free Black community. I think that Harper was probably hopeful for the state, but we never did abolish slavery when we could have and should have, even during the Civil War. And so, I think that she couldn't come home and she always knew that this was the sentiment of the state that where she was born.
Yeah. An anonymous attendee thanks you profusely. She's a 50-year-old Black woman and Baltimore native, and indeed had never heard of her at all. Also, to have the specific address of the slave market on Pratt Street was something that she wants to go visit now. So that's a great comment. Robert Reyes, Sharp Street Church was behind Moses Shepherd House on Pratt Street, located between where the Days Inn is today. Wood Francis had attended church and school at this location. Abolitionist Elijah Tyson lived across Sharp Street, where the Thurgood Marshall statue is today. And Shepherd and Tyson lived there, protect Sharp Street, free people of color from kidnapping.
So here's what I will say. We know I work in preservation, and these large footprint constructions, whether it's Camden Yard or the Convention Center, wipe out these Black communities. And so to remap them, to trace, and the good information that he's giving, to take all of that and make a map of Black Baltimore is what is needed. And in that map, then we can go back and look in, as we do for any other place, the city directories. We can look in, there's not the slave censuses. We can start to look and see and reconstruct, because I have been asking people from Baltimore, if you've got the largest free Black community in the country before the Civil War, why don't I see huge evidence of it when I come to Baltimore?
Yeah.
So the knowledge that Mr. Reyes is giving us is something that needs to be captured and codified and put down and mapped. So, that's why whenever you see me, and the reason why I map is because it's a way to get at information that's not in the text.
Right. And city archives also provide a lot of documentation if they can be found, a lot of
Yeah,
challenges about where those collections are and even the condition they may or may not be in. You talked about collections being burned. Was that in a fire or they were burned with intention?
they
That
were
was the
burned with. I
question.
was told by someone who may have assisted in the burning that they were burned
Hmm.
with intention when they were running out of room, and said, well, these chattel records can go. And they were burned.
Gotcha. That was an interesting tidbit that I wanted to ask myself. You got Krista put a link, Krista Green put a link in from the comment papers and collections of Francis Ellen Watkins Harper. Krista, if you can put that in the chat box, we'll put that there for
Yeah.
later as well. Wonderful presentation. I learned a lot. This is a great question. How can we, I would say, continue or, pursue lifting up the Francis Ellen Watkins Harper story in Baltimore and Maryland? So what else can we do to help?
Very good question. So we uh, habituate as human beings. That's not an accusatory statement. This is what we do. And so when we get ready to think about talking about Baltimore activism, we go to the lineup. We go to Frederick Douglass and we talk about William Still, and we talk about these names that have been presented to us, and we don't, and this happens to women in particular, we don't seem to think about them. They just don't seem to I forgot about her. This is kind of the thing that I hear. I think happens to women frequently. And so
And
one thing has to be that we make a deliberate, concerted effort to, first of all, as I have done, look at her writing and see the relevance of it. She's also speaking from this place, she's not bombastic, and she did not leave behind a autobiography. And I think that I've seen this so many times now. She's not like Frederick Douglass, the most photographed person. I've got almost every image I could find of her, I put in my talk. So, we don't have dozens and dozens and dozens. And so there are lots of things, but I think the city, as you have just mentioned, needs to come together in a concerted research effort to see what everybody knows. And Mr. Reyes is talking, people even on this talk are giving us information. Who are you? And are you an expert? Do you know these things? And you need to convene some sort of a research initiative for her in Baltimore.
with that, we have a couple minutes left. Is there anyone else that has a question to ask?
I don't have a question, but I do want to make a statement based upon what Dr. LaRoche was saying. So first there is the mapping. So Dr. Lawrence Jackson over at the Billie Holiday Liberation Center at Johns Hopkins has been doing mapping. He was the first person that done some mapping in the Sharp Leadenhall community. And so his talk about who lived in Sharp Leadenhall and how the people lived there is one thing. He also did the mapping for Frederick Douglass. So with all of the people that are in academia, I think that we could go to the mayor's office and ask for a little bit more support in raising Francis Ellen Watkins to be a Baltimore, I hate to use the word because I don't know what the better word, but icon or historic figure for our city, so that we can get that attention for her. The Women's Heritage Center is also very good as a supporter of raising the name of Francis Ellen Watkins. So if I guess the heritage area should be responsible for pulling all of those people together and getting a proclamation ready for America 250, so that she could be included in the celebratory names and icons of our city for America 250. So I'll put that on my list of things to do. And I will reach out to the Baltimore City Historical Society, who is also very helpful. So that's what I wanted to say. Dr. LaRoche, thank you so much for bringing this to the light. And I hope that all the people that are participating and on the lecture roster will continue to share the words and the knowledge of friends, because that's how things grow. Is the people that listen to these talks, they go and they tell other people, or they bring it to their communities and their classrooms and things like that. So I hope that you all will spread the word about Francis Ellen Watkins Harper. And just for me, please go read um a, being born in a what I can't say it, I get tongue tied. Her famous poem,
I'll bury me in a free land.
bury me in a land
Free. Yeah.
of free. So
Okay.
Thank
go
you
read
all
that,
so
and
much.
that enough will inspire you.
Thank
So
you, everyone, for attending the Peel's online program today. Don't forget to check our website at thepeel.org for information on their next program, which happens to be an incredible chamber music concert on Sunday, April 27th. Our next BNHA lecture is on April 24th with Joan Pecor's presentation, Elevating Baltimore's Asian Community Stories. If you enjoyed this program, please join our mailing list and consider making a donation to the Baltimore National Heritage Area to support the costs of this and future lunchtime lectures. You can do that on the BNHA website, explorebaltimore.org. Thank you, everyone. Have a pleasant afternoon.
can you send me the chat so I can get all of the details that were in there and the links and so forth? So
We
please,
will.
please curate the chat for me. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
weekend,
Yep.
everyone.
Yep. Have a great day.